Oh, g'day, mate. 40 here. Welcome to the party. Welcome to the inner party. It's Saturday Night Live. So, have you ever heard of Seymour Krim? Seymour Krim, great guy. Oh, wow. YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki receives Free Expression Award from Pro First Amendment Group. That the award ceremony was sponsored by YouTube. We did it for fun. We did it for free. I did it for you. You did it for me. We did it for all the right reasons. Seymour Krim, man, I've just gotten into this bloke. Quite an interesting bloke. He lived from 1922 to 1989. He wrote for The Village Voice and Playboy. And I love his essay, For My Brothers and Sisters in the Failure Business. Wow. It's just an amazing work for my brothers and sisters in the failure business. So I am not a Saul Bellow fan, but I am a James Atlas fan. And James Atlas, let's pile up the recorder here. James Atlas wrote a biography of Saul Bellow. And it's really well written, like everything that James Atlas does. It came out about year 2000. A lot of very keen insights. So I don't enjoy Saul Bellow's writing, but boy, does Saul Bellow remind me of myself in his character foibles. The history of modernist literature is a history of discipleship. So James Joyce saluting Henrik Ibsen, Samuel Beckett apprenticing himself to Samuel Joyce, Ezra Pound sitting at the feet of William Yeats. But for Saul Bellow, Chicago area literary masters were in short supply in 1938. He was on his own. So when it came to the lonely work of mastering his craft, he turned to the works of the writers he loved best: Dostoevsky, Flaubert, Joyce, and Theodore Dreiser. So in 1938, American novels were written by Jews. American novels written by Jews did not exist, as opposed to ethnic Jewish American novels, such as Ludwig Lewison's The Island Within or Abraham Cahan's The Rise of David Levinsky. So Saul Bellow and then Philip Roth, they didn't so much write Jewish novels, they wrote American novels by Jews. So Saul Bellow had this literary tick. He would constantly try to refer to the great books, to the great masters. But he was at the same time very suspicious of high culture, because he was suspicious of everything that impinged upon his freedom, whether in the form of brothers or wives or children or institutions. Saul Bellow did not want anything that impinged on his freedom. Boy, 40 can identify with that. All right, so we can be open here. This is a safe place. You can rate yourself as a lover. You can share what's on your heart and on your mind. This is a safe place for us to share our innermost thoughts. So one of the striking features of Saul Bellow's work is its refusal to be bound by conventional definitions, such as definitions of what constitutes literary seriousness. Saul Bellow was drawn to the gritty side of life. Don't fence me in, bro. Hey, we did it for fun, we did it for free. I did it for you, you did it for me. We did it for all the right reasons. So Saul Bellow had a nose for bad odors to the point where he seldom smells anything else. So he worshipped European literature, and he was very eager to show that he knew his way around it. But at the same time, he put on a great pretense of levels of knowledge that he didn't really have. So he was less interested in high culture than in exploring the subterranean realm. So Saul Bellow said Mortimer Adler, who was the editor of the University of Chicago Great Book Series, Mortimer Adler has much to tell us about Aristotle's ethics, but he has nothing useful to offer us on how to conduct our lives. So Saul Bellow is very influenced by a pioneer of psychoanalytic anthropology, Geza Roheim. So he thought he could discover within the rituals and customs of any human group the structure of its collective unconscious. So according to Roheim, the psyche of the most advanced Europeans was identical to that of the most rudimentary tribesmen. I'm skeptical of that. So Roheim's work struck Saul Bellow as a revelation. Saul Bellow had studied anthropology because Jews in the 1930s, generally speaking, were discouraged from pursuing graduate work in English because the English departments were dominated by Anglo-Saxons, and the history of English literature is a history of Christianity. But Bellow loved the idea of the existence of a spontaneous and robust human nature. He was a great believer in the quest for the essential self. So in the 1950s, Saul Bellow turned to the sexual liberationist teachings of Wilhelm Reich. So Saul Bellow was always going to therapy, but he would stop when the therapy became too confrontive, which is exactly what a psychiatrist said about me. Like, Luke's got lots of therapy speak, but he's not going to be very pleased by any therapy that becomes too confrontational. So in the 1970s, Saul Bellow was into the mystical teachings of Rudolf Steiner. He loved D.H. Lawrence. Saul Bellow delighted in his physical appeal. So there was a studio executive who invited him to become an actor. Was Wilhelm Reich in The Tribe? Is the Pope Catholic? You bet he is, bro. So like the self-regarding heroes of his book, Saul Bellow was proud of his flat stomach, his stamina on the paddleball courts. He delighted in his physical appeal. Narcissistic traits that a succession of psychiatrists diagnosed him with were fed by this gift from nature, as was his prose, which suffered from an excess of self-delight. Damn, this guy reminds me of a certain side of myself. So Saul Bellow had the air of an Old Testament prophet, but his fly was always down. So he embraced the progressive morals of the New York bohemian crowd. Everything could fall apart at the sight of a pretty young girl. For Jewish intellectuals of his generation, sex was a revelation as charged as their first encounters with Freud and Marx. It opened up a whole new world. Their parents' marriages, constrained by provincialism and the pressures of adopting to the new world, seemed intolerably suffocating to their newly liberated children. Bro, I paid a set designer a lot of money, and he told me that I needed to get, a variety of colors here into my live streams to make them more visually appealing. And my set designer said that nothing adds color like Ricola. Also, it's sugar-free and delicious. You can eat these like candy. Sugar-free lemon Ricola, so good. And very soothing for the live streamers' tonsils and throat. So what was more of a revelation for you? Was it sex, Marx, or Freud? Or some other intellectual? Yeah, the Ricola makes the Reiki and deep throating less painful. Saul Bellow said he did not feel guilty about his adulteries. He considered them his due. But the satisfaction of conquest outweighed the physical transaction. His sexual appetite was never voracious. Oh, let's all take a simultaneous sip. Simultaneous sip of Crystal Light, and then in the morning, I've got some Core Power. Complete protein, bro. Whoa! Josh Randall says Ricola gets me high. $10 super chat from Josh Randall. Cheers, mate. This Crystal Light Classic Orange. Looking at you, Josh. That's so good. I can't stop at 2 swallows. One swallow does not make a summer. So for his infidelities, it was his pride that must be satisfied. His flesh got what was left over. Do I ever drink water? Yeah, I've got a big bottle of water here. I mainly drink water. I just treat myself with Crystal Light when I want to celebrate a special occasion like a super chat. Then I bring out the Crystal Light. So I drink 3 times as much water as I drink Crystal Light, guys. Believe me. Don't you know that the live stream's the new novel? I'm vicariously performing my life as a novelistic performance. Oh, you grew up drinking Kool-Aid, so I think I was at a friend's house and he had Kool-Aid, and he also had in the refrigerator, he had orange juice. Yeah, I drink tap water. Usually I can't be bothered filtering it. Oh, but I also drink a lot of Essentia. But bros, you don't want to drink Essentia after about 2 p.m. or it'll just keep you up at night. It's that energizing. Like, Essentia has a special energizing power, but you only want to use it for good and only drink it before 2 p.m. You know what I like to drink Essentia water with? Diatomaceous earth. Like, pour in some Essentia water, then a big heaping spoonful of diatomaceous earth. All right, just mix it all around. Diatomaceous earth, it just cleans out your insides. There's nothing like some cleansing soil. Diatomaceous earth. So anyway, my friend was drinking Kool-Aid. He offered me Kool-Aid, and I said, no, I'll have the orange juice. And he said, no, don't drink the orange juice. And I went and poured myself a glass of the orange juice anyway, even though he told me not to. And I said, what's the matter with drinking orange juice? He said, it's too expensive. Oh boy, did I feel bad about that. Call me tomorrow, because I'm gonna go to bed after this stream. I'm up late. Is that a real thing? What's the real thing? So Sorbello was deeply suspicious of people whose intent upon fending off any entanglement would interfere with his work. Sounds like my dad. Looking for whey protein powder the other day, wound up buying some collagen instead. Yeah, collagen's good, right? Like ground up bone powder. Under-earning leads to Kool-Aid addiction. Friends noted that Bello was touchy, quick to take offense, and would nail with quiet ferocity someone who had astonished him by offering the mildest criticism. Damn, this sounds like me. Drinking a spoonful of diatomaceous earth with Essentia water. Yeah, that, I don't know, I could be wrong, but I find diatomaceous earth energizing. I don't know why. It's people use it for gardening. My brother's the gardener, answer man. So he sells diatomaceous earth, and you don't want to snort it. Don't sniff it. Like when you put the powder in with the water, hold it like far away from you, so you don't sniff it, and then just like hold your breath and then drink it down. I don't know why. I just find it energizing. So keeping himself from encumbrance was the strategy that governed Sorbello's life. It sounds like me, like I'm a 54-year-old bachelor. This is embarrassing. Whether it was wives, children, publishers, lawyers, friends, or even ideas, he maintained his distance as a way of preserving his fragile sense of self. Yes, Sorbello was envious of Philip Roth's ascension as the greatest American Jewish novelist. So Sorbello and John Updike kept their distance from Philip Roth. So by the sound of Blake Bailey's biography of Philip Roth, it sounds like Philip was a better friend to Sorbello and John Updike than vice versa. Organic Concord grape juice is a magical elixir. You got to mix it with the diatomaceous earth, guys. Has anyone else enjoyed diatomaceous earth? And Josh Randall, another super chat, says, when are we all going to have Crystal Light shots? Man, Good times. Good times. You gotta try the diatomaceous earth. Luke and I are gonna down a fifth of Crystal Light and hit Sunset Boulevard. We'll probably get arrested. Yeah, but I know a lawyer who's great. If you ever get arrested for committing a lewd act in public, I just keep his card in my pocket whenever I go out. Man, is this me? Is this 40? Press 1 if this is 40. Keeping himself free from encumbrance was the strategy that governed 40's life. Whether it was wives, children, publishers, lawyers, friends, or even ideas, he maintained his distance as a way of preserving his fragile sense of self. So I'm something of a, intellectual gigolo. I fall in love with every pretty idea that comes along, but stay faithful to none of them. I still haven't reached out to Catherine Hurd. I don't want to be a creeper, but I'm really inspired by the quality of her journalism and the beautiful fit of her pants. I have so much respect for this woman. Yeah, so Saul Bellow got a call from Metro Goldwyn Mayer. Studio executive had seen his photograph in a newspaper, offered to make him a star. Saul Bellow wasn't an Errol Flynn type or a George Raft type. He wasn't handsome or tough in the conventional sense, but he could have a great screen career in the sensitive role, the guy who loses the girl to the George Raft type or the Errol Flynn type. So, like many powerful figures, Saul Bellow preferred the company of lesser lights who made few demands on him, did not compete for attention, and enjoyed reflected glory. Wait, is this me? Like the Talmud Chacham, the wise Talmud scholars of his distant shtetl past, wise men revered for their learning, Saul Bellow spent his days hunched over books. Well, I don't hunch over books because I've learned the Alexander technique, guys. Soulmates had to be men for Saul Bellow, but they did not have to be Jewish. They just had to possess what he considered Jewish qualities: emotional intensity, a reverence for Russian literature, and a love of high-minded gossip. What's high-minded gossip as opposed to middle-minded gossip and then low-minded gossip? So his first marriage lasted like 14 years, even though they were both committing adultery very early on. So he found his first wife too practical. Too practical. What's my favorite reading position? Here, I'll show you my favorite reading position. So, we did it for fun. We did it for free. I did it for you. You did it for me. We did it for all the right reasons. So I just like to kick back here. I think this is my favorite reading position. I put on the old CPAP. Oh, yeah. And then just kick back here with my iPad. Oh, so good. Except for I have my headphones on listening to a little music. So I think this is my favorite reading position. So this is what I do. Then sometimes I stand up. Then sometimes I sit in a chair. But probably this is the position I'm in most when I'm reading. Yeah, it's like, very relaxing. Just the two pillows up here. And then I've got nice support down here. Got the tea, and then I got this. Oh, it's really good, mate. It's a beautiful thing, beautiful thing. I got my Ricola right here. Whenever I get bored, like sometimes I get sleepy or bored reading, or just I need a bump, and so I like a Diet Pepsi or some cough drops. Or this afternoon I was feeling really risque. I had 2 Greek yogurt ice creams of the chocolate fudge variety. About 3:30, I needed a bump. Good times. Okay. And then occasionally I'll just lie on my stomach on my elbows and read that way. But the position I showed you is the main way that let's pile up the Ricola here. Just had that beautiful yellow color. As my set designer suggested. Okay, so Saul Bellow thought that his first wife was too practical. Why would you hate a wife for being practical? You want a wife who's practical, too controlling. She didn't give him room to breathe. Someday he said he would be claimed by a woman who appreciated him, and I will go. This sounds like me. The passive construction was significant. For Saul Bellow, choosing a lover meant allowing himself to be chosen. It's the same way he chose jobs and domiciles and wives. He waited for someone else to make the first move. If you replace that light switch wall plate, it will freshen up the 40 tabernacle. In his work, Saul Bellow asserted himself with courage and tenacity. Yes, on my live streams, I'm a mighty warrior, but the rest of my life, I'm pretty passive. But when it came to domestic arrangements, others dictated terms until he chafed at them. Saul does what he wants. The phrase recurs among his friends and associates. Pretending to be at the mercy of others was a way of disguising his fiercely independent will. By denying responsibility for the choices he made in life, he could circumvent the powerful forces, father, brothers, society, ranged against his ambition. Passivity in Bellow's hands was an instrument of freedom. Damn, this sounds just like me. Okay, let's go to the chat. The chat, Mrs. Tang. Yes, I mainly drink tap water. Have you guys tried diatomaceous earth? You know, just adding some diatomaceous earth with your essential water. I find it very energizing. So, Moral Outrage sprinkles diatomaceous earth on my sheets for bed bugs. Ford is an elaborate AI. He's just a simulation, bros. How do I read on Shabbos Kodesh? That same way. I kick back, or I stand up. Or I often read and go for a walk, because I live within the Eruv. Do they make modafinil-infused Ricola? Modafinil-infused didgeridoo wax. I was forced to read a Saul Bellow book in college. I don't remember a single thing about it. I do not like Saul Bellow's work. I did read Ravelstein. That kept me going through the whole thing. I have no idea if Saul Bellow underwent MK Ultra experimentation at McGill University. There's nothing about that in this book. Leonard Cohen did. So his first, I think one of his first novels was called The Victim, or a short story. The first attempt in American literature to consider Jewishness not in its singularity, not as constitutive of a special world of experience, but as a quality that informs all of modern life, as the quality of modernity itself. Sounds a little arrogant. Is Jewishness the quality of modernity itself? But it was through Saul Bellow's efforts that Jewish literature became American literature. He wasn't much of a teacher because he wasn't much interested in helping other people. So Saul Bellow as a teacher was a clock watcher. He was not one to nurture talent. He delivered high-minded lectures on the modern world. He dabbled in improbable investments. He borrowed money from his brothers. He made advances to other men's girlfriends and on occasion to their wives. He proposed marriage with unnatural frequency, and he craved affection from those he antagonized. I love this book. James Atlas is a great writer. Philosophy was one of the unfortunate legacies of Saul Bellow's immersion in the University of Chicago great books culture. His heroes shared a penchant for belaboring ideas. They were the products of a provincial Chicago boy's efforts to show that he wasn't provincial. Like, the more effort you make to show that you're not something, the more it shines through. Like, I had a girlfriend who said, the more you try to be different from your father, the more you'll be like him. The more Saul Bellow tried to show he was at home with the whole of Western thought. They expressed an impulse to distance him from his true, more painful material. Their philosophy was a flight into abstraction. So the gritty streets were Saul Bellow's real material. So Saul Bellow thought domestic life stifled the artist. It was bourgeois. To be modern meant to be detached from tradition, traditional sentiments, from national politics and the family. Is that what it means to be modern? For Saul Bellow, the main problem with Paris was the Parisians. They didn't seem to know who Saul Bellow was. That was the problem with the people in Paris. They didn't know who he was. When he'd talk about his books, and vacillated between grandiosity and self-doubt, he was unaware that in Parisian literary circles, to discuss one's own work was considered gauche. So we got a quote in the chat. Sorbello had given me a list of a few names of literary people in Montreal he very much wanted to meet. Leonard Cohen was at the top of that list. Oh man, the Crystal Light is so good tonight. Nice and chilled. Yeah, I haven't, the only Sorbello novel I've read is Ravelstein. I think I dipped into others, just couldn't make it through. So Sorbello really got into Wilhelm Reich. Reich wrote a book called The Function of the Orgasm. It was widely read in progressive circles, as Trotsky's Art and Revolution had been a decade before. So Paul Goodman, a reliable indicator of intellectual trends, was a Reichian. So many of Sorbello's Jewish friends were Reichians. So Reich's emphasis on sexual gratification kind of validated their own tendencies. Reich was an intellectual fashion in the 1940s and 50s. So just as in the 30s, Sorbello had been enthusiastic about Trotsky, now in the 40s and 50s, he got into Reich. So Reich's method represented the psychoanalytic equivalent of what Sorbello aspired to in his own work and life, the freedom of unfettered self-expression. So Reichianism wasn't a philosophy, according to Reich, it was a science. So Reich thought he was the heir to Freud. So according to Reich, the cathartic total orgasm was the key to health. Full genitality. But most humans were prevented from achieving these convulsive orgasms by the presence of character armor, rigid defenses that stifle development and block the free flow of sexuality. Damming up the libido caused neuroses and repressed psychic energy. So Reich called this orgone energy, and he prescribed building a certain box to build up your orgone energy. Even by the standards of artistic touchiness, Sorbello's fragile grandiosity stood out. He was capable of bearing a grudge for decades. Whoa, Josh Randall, super chat. Last time I went deep on Crystal Light, I woke up with my ex's ex-girlfriend. Yeah, you got to be careful. Only do it in moderation, maybe only on weekends. Sorbello had trouble engaging his students unless he was having sex with them. They weren't real to him. He preferred to read aloud to his students from his own novels. It was obvious that he had work of more importance than preparing for his lectures. He would love to laugh at his own jokes. He would laugh out loud at the funny bits of his own writing. He would have a wonderful time, recalls a student, a much better time than the rest of us. So his self-delight was typical. Sorbello always laughed at his own jokes. He derived huge enjoyment from reciting his own work. He never wanted criticism, he only wanted praise. By setting the tone himself, he had a better chance of getting the response he wanted, at least in the short run. So Sorbello was married 5 times. How did you know when a marriage was coming to an end? An increase in his frenetic pace of travel was a reliable portent of the dissolution of a marriage. Now, he got married 5 times. He refused to give up on the idea of marriage, even though it was obvious that he was completely unsuited to the institution. He longed for a home and family, but he longed for them as a child might. He wanted constant attention, constant devotion, but he also had the powerful need to go off and explore the world on his own, at will. This contradiction never seemed to occur to him. He would pursue the fantasy of the perfect marriage and the perfect wife again and again. Saul always had trouble with women. He thought he wouldn't have all these troubles with a girl. So one woman said, you want people to pour love on you and you soak it up and you swallow it. You can't get enough. And when another woman runs after you, you'll go with her. You're so happy when somebody begs you to oblige. You can't stand up under flattery. Wow, that sounds like 40. I had girlfriends who just leave here so exhausted because I was just so needy. Okay, so Art Bell says, Luke, 2 questions. Will you copy German in Venice, run a series covering the beach scene, Jewish in Venice? How about offering up to Jean-Francois Garopi to be on his show, reasonable and responsible? JF doesn't have people on his show anymore. So I don't think JF would have any interest of me coming on his show. The heroes of Saul Bellow's novels aren't renderings of Saul Bellow the man. They're idealized versions of Saul Bellow the man. They're tall, they have distinguished lineage, and they're brilliant. So by altering the details to suit himself, Saul Bellow could become, in his novels, the person that he always wanted to be. Saul Bellow was ardently loyal to anyone who passed his very rigorous tests of friendship for as long as they served his needs. Then he'd dispose of them. Saul Bellow was not a nurturing person to students, to children, to wives, or to parents. He just wanted to soak up the nurturing. For Saul Bellow, children represented encroachment on his freedom. Children, like wives and friends and lovers, were always in danger of making emotional demands, requiring attention, and expecting to be loved. And Saul Bellow had no time for that. So Saul Bellow focused his need for approval on a long line of powerful and disapproving businessmen, and the anger that his insatiable need for approval engendered was enormous. No amount of praise was ever enough for Saul Bellow. The void could never be filled. He was a hungry man. Luke, would you talk to a self-described, literally autistic Jerusalemite who was working with David up until 2 days ago when they got in an argument? Sure. I mean, I think I'll talk to anyone. Is this behavior related to Eva Maverick? No, I think, well, it may be. His mother died when he was about 20. The more I follow Luke in his streams, the more I realize he is a soft-hearted puppy. JF had Richard Spencer. When did he have Richard Spencer on? Issue an invite, earn his trust. Don't have any news on Richard or Wozy. All I've got are thoughts on when novels still mattered. So Saul Bellow's excitement at finding acceptance among the New York Jewish intellectuals quickly gave way to contempt. His sense of inadequacy was vanquished by his grandiosity. Boy, I can identify with that. He no longer needed their praise, so the more his reputation grew in the literary world, the more distasteful he found that world. When Saul Bellow was writing a book, in every major book, he'd get to a point where he felt the overwhelming need to destroy his own life. So the opposite of Flaubert, Saul Bellow deliberately cultivated chaos at home. I have everything I need here, but it's getting to be too safe. He thrived on adversity. So there was a New York literary party in New York. One of the guests came up to Jack Ludwig and said, I understand you know Saul Bellow. Know him, Jack Ludwig replied. Hell, I'm fucking his wife. The alt-right of 2016 seems like a distant memory for me now. What will take its place? Late 2020, Richard was on JF. Richard was refused at first, got upset. What about our friendship? Then and only then, JF had him on. Oh, so yeah, JF doesn't really want guests. So I think JF has just found it too exhausting dealing with other people with their insatiable emotional needs. Maybe a little bit like Saul Bellow here. So Theodore Weiss summed up Jack Ludwig's motive. So Jack Ludwig was a friend of Saul Bellow. For Jack, if he couldn't go to bed with Saul, next best thing was to go to bed with his wife. So Saul Bellow's friendship with Jack Ludwig was not the only one with homosexual overtones. So there was an unnatural intensity of Saul Bellow's friendships with men, and people noticed. Writers who posed a threat to Saul Bellow's hegemony got the cold shoulder. Writers like Philip Roth and John Updike. Writers who occupied a place safely below his own on the literary ladder were seen as comrades in the travail business. Toward these needy souls, he gladly extended a helping hand. Luke, how big is your library and what sort of books do you have in your collection? So most of my books are ebooks. So for physical books, I think I only have like 100 physical books. So probably half of them are on Judaism, and then a few books on Alexander Technique, maybe 15 books on Australia. Do I think Richard Spencer is a secret admirer of Wilhelm Reich? No idea. Oh, this is interesting, and it reminds me a bit of myself. There's something indiscriminate about Saul Bellow's letter writing. It was a literary profligacy. He wrote so openly to so many correspondents, reflected his egalitarian spirit, his willingness to accept the wide range of other people, but it also reflected his loneliness, his eagerness for company, any company. There was a certain impersonality in his boisterous writing style. No matter who he was writing to, the letters have a single tone, as if he was writing to just one person, himself. So yeah, I'm very happy to read ebooks. I don't prefer physical books. Elliot Black keeps his books in his closet along with other things that are vitally important. Elliot finds books unsightly. I find them giving of life. So, in the spring of 1960, Saul Bellow began therapy with sexologist Dr. Albert Ellis. Have you heard of Albert Ellis and rational emotive therapy? Rational cognitive behavioral therapy. Can YouTube handle 2 pirates on one ship? The Luke boat, the Love boat was sunk by Captain Spencer. It became the hate wreck. JF would make a better guess than Woes. So, do you guys know who Albert Ellis is? Duva just listed 30 books on eBay. You're not cool unless you have a physical copy of Infinite Jest in view while you're streaming. Yeah, I've never read Infinite Jest. Don't own a copy. So, Albert Ellis was a Jewish immigrant. He was a ladies' man. He'd been through many wives. He bragged openly about his conquests. Bellow diagnosed him as a phallic narcissist, the same diagnosis Ellis applied to Saul Bellow. Flamboyantly eccentric, Albert Ellis, a tall, hawk-nosed figure with a long, sallow face, munched on sandwiches during the sessions, explaining he was a diabetic, required a special diet. Apparently, it didn't agree with him. Saul Bellow remembered Albert Ellis's high-smelling farts. Albert Ellis's libertine views found a sympathetic ear in Saul Bellow. Speaking to packed halls around the country, Albert Ellis anticipated the free love movement of the late 60s. He said that puritanical views about sex create havoc in our love, marriage, and family relations. The goal of therapy, Albert Ellis proclaimed, was sexual pleasure. Freud didn't know a thing. Albert Ellis would talk like a drill sergeant. I got a lot of friends who love Albert Ellis. Reich was full of it. Human race was out of its mind. For Ellis, therapy was common sense. I talked people out of their BS. His method was to get his patients to act on their wishes and to not feel bad about it. No one was perfect, said Albert Ellis. Even Hitler was just a fallible, messed up human being. That's where Saul Bellow drew the line. He and Ellis had a heated argument over Hitler. So Bellow entered treatment with Albert Ellis to cope with his rage at his second wife. My goal was to get him unangry, Ellis recorded, which wasn't easy with a person like that because he was a novelist. Novelists think that all emotions are good. Saul Bellow minimized the therapy as he always did. He only went into therapy when he was desperate, then he left as soon as he could tolerate the level of pain in his life. As a lover, Saul Bellow received indifferent marks. He was the put it in and take it out type. He didn't know a clitoris from a kneecap. Another lover found him passionate and virile, but he had a lack of interest in experimentation. Like Herzog, he was a Quaker in his lovemaking. He couldn't abandon himself sexually. Press 3 in the chat if you can abandon yourself sexually. Press 2 if you're the put it in and take it out type. And press 3 if you are passionate and virile. The compulsive seducer invariably turns out to be the most insecure man, says an actress who had a brief fling with Bello in the 60s. That sounds like me. The compulsive seducer turns out to be the most insecure man. She remarked on Saul Bello's sexual do's and don'ts. Yeah, I remember Kit Natividad wanted me to slip a finger into her back hole. I was like, no, I've never done that. I'm not into that kind of experimentation. You guys should see the 99 theses that I present to every potential lover, so that we have everything straight and clear and out on the table what 40 does and does not do. Sex was never the driving impulse behind his conquests. Doesn't seem to have chosen women out of lust. I've no reports which described him as a stud. He sought some kind of uncommitted, temporary intimacy, even affection, rather than sexual possession. He found women overly demanding sexually. Press 5 if you find women overly demanding sexually. Their sexual aggressiveness was just another effort to impose upon his freedom, just another demand. Saul Bello persisted in viewing himself as an old-fashioned romantic spurned by unfeeling women. He met these women and then he made them up, a friend said of his wives. So he was unable to handle women in their reality. He'd hang on to a fantasy view of these women, and when reality broke through, he would cut and run. So many of these ladies who hungered after Saul wanted to be touched by the magic of his artistry, and they would willingly give themselves to Saul to be touched by his magic wand. Art says, Carter Godfrey, those two lads plus JF would be R&R in their comments and language. Always the Apricot Sky Tour. Revisit the sacred sands of the filming locations. Crystal heavy is Luke's heart. Thanks, Art. Nothing like cold, crisp crystal light. So Saul Bello found that literary fame still left him an empty bank account. Not only had literary fame not made him rich, it had not even made him solvent. For someone as cynical as he was about the virtues of marriage, Saul Bello was notably casual about proposing it. So a lot of the women that he proposed to soon realized that all he wanted was someone to fornicate with. So Saul Bello called himself the Nathan Hale of sex. He would sacrifice his life to it. The only thing he liked about being married, he said, was dinner time. He did miss his boys. He had children. 12 years in one marriage, 7 in another, 2 sons whose lives are withdrawn from me, he said, sounding a rare note of regret. But he got the dates wrong. His marriage to Anita lasted 15 years and Desandra 4. Saul Bello never made a concerted effort to grapple with the issues that underlay his propensity for serial marriage. He preferred to attribute his problems to women's predatory natures. What do women want? Herzog says plaintively. What women want? See, Herzog anticipated my cinematic classic. They eat green salad and drink human blood. So, what animates all the Saul Bello's heroes? Pure rage, like Philip Roth's protagonist. Now, unlike so many other tragic, famous writers for whom success became a hazard, so F. Scott Fitzgerald was wrecked by hack work and drink. William Faulkner squandered his genius in Hollywood. Hemingway was destroyed by his own myth. Bello adapted easily to fame. He got new clothes, a new car, a new co-op, but he overall showed few signs of outward alteration. He noted most successful writers, once transformed into major literary figures for the rest of their lives, do little more than give solemn interviews to prestigious journals or serve on White House committees or fly to the Bermudas to participate in international panel discussions on the crisis in the arts. The writer is usually eclipsed by celebrity, but not Saul Bello. Saul Bello was adept at managing both celebrity and writing because it fit his self-image. It ratified his conviction that he had been destined for greatness. Fame was only the world's belated confirmation of Saul Bellow's genius. As far as he was concerned, nothing had changed. The arrival of a child in a marriage meant that Saul Bellow himself was no longer the child. He'd been displaced by his own son. This was always the moment he chose to leave. Saul Bellow's sexual conduct was a paradox. He regarded with increasing dismay the sexual revolution. He inveighed against the unregulated sex of the permissive 60s while passing up no opportunity to indulge himself. So he had a biblical old world morality, but his fly was entirely unzipped at all times. So Bellow's quota of adultery was not satisfied by extramarital affairs. He cheated on his girlfriends too. Once the chase was over and he had the woman, he began to wander. Wow. So where do writers come from? Where do journalists come from? So Tom Wolfe wrote about them in his great 2012 novel, Back to Blood. People have a colorful picture of newspaper reporters, like these daring types who break stories and uncover corruption and put themselves in risky situations to get a scoop, as in Robert Redford in All the President's Men and Burt Lancaster in The Sweet Smell of Success. Art Bell says, Cotto and Gottfried are harsh about YouTube. Nothing is left on their channel. You must seek out their podcasts on other platforms. They just bolted. New on YouTube is the applaud dollar button. Okay. F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife was schizophrenic. Oswald says, Cotto and Gottfried would be less cranky if they read some Saul Bellow and got laid. So where do journalists come from? Okay, so Tom Wolfe says, if you ask me, newspaper reporters are created at age 6 when they first go to school. In the schoolyard, boys immediately divide into two types, immediately. There are those who have the will to be daring and to dominate, and those who don't have it. Those who don't spend half their early years trying to work out a modus vivendi with those who do. This sounds a bit like me. I was not the dominating schoolboy figure. I was not the big boy in school. Anything short of subservience would be an okay modus vivendi. But there are boys from the weaker side of the divide who grow up with the same dreams as the strong boys. Okay, they too dream of power, money, fame, and beautiful lovers. Yep, this is me. Boys like this grow up instinctively realizing that language can be a sword or a gun. So I did have people who tell me when my blog was big, the pen is mightier than the sword. Used skillfully, it has the power not so much to achieve things as to tear things down, including people. One of the pleasures of being a writer and being a journalist is you get to be very cruel. And you get to tear down the boys who come out on the stronger side of the dividing line. So that's what liberals are. Ideology, economics, social justice, they are nothing but their prom outfits. Their politics was set for life in the schoolyard at age 6. They were the weak, and forever after they resented the strong. That's why journalists are liberals. Very same schoolyard events that push them toward the written word, push them toward liberalism. If you want power through words in journalism, rhetorical genius is not enough. You need content, you need new material, you need news. You have to find it. You, from the weak side, can develop such a craving for new information. You end up doing things that would terrify any strong man. You will put yourself in dangerous situations amid dangerous people with relish. You will go alone without any backup. You, with your weak manner, end up approaching the vilest of the vile with a demand. You have some information, and I need it, and I deserve it, and I will have it. Yes, that's what constitutes the writer. I mean, that's certainly my story. I mean, I would, when my blog was going strong, I would get up after a few hours blogging, and I'd go for a walk, and as I'd walk, I'd go like this with my fingers, and I'd think, there's a new sheriff in town, his name is Luke Ford. I just like, these fingers can move the world. Like anything that's happened to me, that was Tom Wolfe in his 2012 novel, Back to Blood. So anything that's happened to me since about age 10, I just think, I'll use this in my writing one day. I'll use this in a novel one day. Like when I was homeless in LA for about 6 months, sleeping in my car, I think, I'll use this in a novel one day. Like every humiliation, I just think, this is going to be great for my writing. going to come in just fine for my writing. Okay, let me...
Present in the person, directly in front of us.
Why do I look Asian today?
And finally, one of the last great simplicities we use to assemble our impressions, a coherent impression of
I think I'm
somebody
turning
else,
Japanese.
is, of course, stereotypes. These are generalizations about individuals based on their membership in a group. Proximity and resemblance roles we actually talked about earlier. Stereotypes are a shortcut to communication, but really not to understanding. An interesting, quick example about this, I call this the door story. Professors Simmons and Levins from Cornell U had strangers, actually they're Confederates, on campus stop and ask pedestrians for directions. As the two people talk, they are suddenly rudely interrupted by two men who pass between them carrying a door. The interruption lasts.
Okay, so Seymour Krim. He committed suicide at about age nearly 70 in 1989. And he wrote this great essay for Playboy in 1969. The American novel made us. I was made, I was shaped, wetted, given a world with a purpose by the American realistic novel of the mid to late 1930s. Here he is writing in Playboy in 1969. From the age of 14 to 17, I gorged on the works of Thomas Wolfe, beginning with Of Time in the River, catching up with Look Homeward Angel, and then keeping pace till Big Tom's stunning end. Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, James Farrell, John Steinbeck, John O'Hara, James Cain, Richard Wright, John Dos Passos, Erskine Caldwell, Jerome Weidman, and William Saroyan. And I knew in my pumping heart that I wanted to be such a novelist. To me, an isolated, super sensitive New York Jewish boy, given the privacy to dream in the locked bathroom of middle-class life. So the author here, Seymour Krim, I think essentially grew up as an orphan. So he was very much kind of that, I assume, that neglected, weak boy on the playground. So he lived a lot of his life in his fantasy world, as did I. So I don't think I was ever much above like average in terms of status in school. Not until, say, 11th and 12th grade in high school, when I moved above average because I was the editor of my high school newspaper and did other things. So the super sensitive boy given the privacy to dream. These novels taught me about the America out there. I wanted to identify with the big, gaudy continent and its variety of human beings who came to me so clearly through the pages of these so-called fictions. I dreamed Southern accents, Okies, Bourbon and Branchwater. This is me, like growing up as a Seventh-day Adventist, preacher's kid. I read all these books, and there was this amazing world out there that I just wanted to plunge into. Learned about juke joints, studs Lonergan, speeding trucks, big highways, Bigger Thomas, USA, USA. Nothing to me in those crucial, irredeemable years was as glamorous as the unofficial seamy side of American life. Yes, that was my life experience. I was reading Harold Robbins novels in my teens. I read probably 12 Harold Robbins novels in my teens. Then I never read them after my teens. The seamy side of American life, the smack, brutality, and cynical truth of it. All of which I learned from the dynamic novels that appeared in Manhattan between 1936 and 1939. So I didn't do much homework in high school, but I just read tons of books, just read tons of novels. Novels were my high school, my religion, my major fantasy life. Instead of escaping into adventure or detective fiction, I was a kid snob tucked into my literary American dream scene. I escaped into the vision of reality that these fresh and tough pioneering writers were bringing to print from all corners of the country. Even though these books usually ended bitterly or without faith, they were patriotic in a style that deeply impressed me, without being able to say why. They had integrity to reality. Right? They recreated the very accents of frustration or despair voiced by their characters. They were all truthful in recreating American life. This was a naked, free show about my real nation that I damn well did not receive at home, a home full of euphemisms and concealments, with the death of one parent, the breakdown and suicide of the other, hanging over the charade of good manners. Right? So novels would give you the truth, as opposed to the charade of what came in the newspapers, the radio, and the movies. This was the first writing that ever really possessed me, and I would never get over it. How can I communicate the savage greenness of the American novel of 30 years ago, so the late 1930s, as it was felt by a keenly emotional boy? So I spent much of my youth just reading books and a lot of novels. We lived in the perpetual present. We were inspired to become prose writers because of these novels. It wasn't a question of talent. If you responded to the leaping portrait of American life that these realists were showing us with their professionally curved words, you created the talent out of yourself. At first in imitation of what you creamed over in their style, point of view, and impact, then later in painful effort to do equal justice to your own personal test tube of experience. Wow, I so resonate with this great essay from Playboy magazine, Seymour Krim here in 1969. The deservedly legendary American novelists of this raw-knuckled period before the World War II. They were our celebrities. Remember when novelists were celebrities? They encouraged an untested, unformed young guy to dig into his own worst personal experience and make something exciting of it in the form of a story. So that's kind of how I approached my life. I started writing stories by third grade. I was churning out stories. Everything that was painful and humiliating, I wanted to turn it into exciting work. So we would all look at the unique grain of our life as would-be novelists. We were swept up wanting to be novelists. To our young, hungering minds, hooked by the constantly fresh stream of national lives that made their debut in these novels. It was impossible to quit once the real American scene entered your imagination. I started reading books about America by second grade. I was falling in love with America. It just seemed like such an amazing country. And then there was World War II. There was nothing else for the youthful truth maniac to go to but the new novels hurrying each other out of the New York publishing womb. So I got the sense in novels that I was getting the real essence of life. Compared to novels, newspaper and radio and TV just seemed inadequate. So new fiction would pour out of the New Yorker, the Saturday Review of Literature, Esquire. The city buzzed with the magazine unveiling of any new talent. It was news that traveled with enthusiasm. There was Owen Shaw in the New Yorker, Dee Donato in Esquire, James Laughlin telling it like it is in Story magazine. So the 30s drew to a vicious close with the Spanish Civil War and World War II. Politicalization of the US novel became more acute. The bleak international scene began to throw its heavy shadow over our virginal literary pine thrust. It suddenly became a little bit weary. But if you're coming alive in the late 30s, it just seemed like one non-stop fictional ball. So each of these exciting 1930s novelists seemed to me inside my comet-shooting young head. Each of these novelists was a pioneer. They were tackling unrecorded experience in each hidden alley and cove of the country that I wanted to be a part of. Bringing it to ground for the first time, binding it up and sending it east for exhibition before the rest of the country. Their moral flame was ignited, burning steadily. They would not have gone to the huge labor of making the entire country and its people accessible to fiction. So this flame was used to warm their faith in the value of writing. So the American novelists of the 1930s took over what used to be the explorer's role. Okay, after the merely geographical aspects of exploration had already faded into the bottom drawer of childhood. So when I was 7, 8, 9, I was reading all these books about explorers. But after that, it was the novelist for me. Alex says, Saul Bellows Sees the Day is the only novel I read that I remember absolutely nothing about. It convinced me to switch my major. I blame Kevin McDonald. Yeah, I'm no Saul Bellows fan, but I am a big Seymour Krim fan. So the moral integrity of these great realist novels from William Saroyan to John Steinbeck to William Faulkner. So they were bringing us the truth, that which had been seen and smelled and suffered but had never before been written. So these were the outriders, the advanced scouts of the truth. What they brought back from the contemporary American frontier was as rare and precious to those of us who wanted the truth as the information brought to Earth by an astronaut. So when he was 10 and 11, Seymour Crim wanted to be an explorer. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a missionary or an explorer prior to age 9 or 10. So in my fantasy life, I would, follow along and succeed people like, various big explorers like Robert Scott, Roald Amundsen. So the American novelists of the 30s took over the explorer's role in my mind. Who else but these self-elected, self-taught, self-starting, gutsy men with a sniff of glory in their nostrils? These were the real explorers of this country's unadvertised life. So if you said to somebody in high school, I wanted to write, it could only mean one thing: the novel. You don't understand what it used to mean to say, I want to write. One had the image of climbing the jaggedest of the Rockies alone, flying solo like Lindbergh, pitting one's ultimate stuff against all the odds of middle-class life and coming out of the toughest kind of spiritual ordeal with that book that was more than a book, a book that was a payoff on everything. It was heavenly combat. It was self-confrontation of the most hallowed kind. The legendary American novel was the most romantic achievement there was in US life for the dreamer. Love this novel here this essay by Seymour Crim. At least Dennis Dale is back in Lukeland, the daredevil Dennis Dale of Portlandia. So to have wanted to be a writer in this country in the late 1930s had a gorgeous mystique that was inseparable from the American dream. All of our great novelists were suckled by the American dream and then kicked out into the cold to make it come true. So, American dream, AD. You want to go all the way, that meant that the individual had no option but to fly above the skyscrapers, write the great American novel, not as an act of literature, but as an affirmation of the dream dust of the American dream, that all of us are born under that flag. So all the driving personal ambition, the energy, the initiative, the prizing of individual conscience and courage, right? This is what it took to be a novelist. The act of writing a novel made use of all these qualities, but the reward that one sought was not gold. Bestsellers as such were sneered at unless they occurred by accident. The goal was absolute truth to reality, to make a landmark on the American landscape, to somehow redeem the original intentions of the country, represent the purest kind of success stories. So the novelist, the writer, we tend to live a lot in a world of fantasy. So reality is continually disappointing writers, novelists, would-be novelists, and who almost always tend to be on the left. So America, the reality is always going to fall short of your fantasy. So from a measurement of reality versus a fantasy, America fails. Now, when you compare America to other countries, in reality, America does great. But unhappy people living in fantasy who don't do so well navigating reality, these are the type of people who tend to become writers. So being a good realist novelist in the late 1930s was not dependent on having the extraordinary gift of style. It meant only that you had a huge spiritual truth to tell the truth. That you wanted to force the country to see how it wasn't living up to its ideal. So the mystical American novel was bound up with all these big national feelings of the American dream. And all these aspirations just writhed around in the direct center of one's being. This was more than just literature. This was the most thrilling embodiment of one's destiny as a member of Making the Impossible Possible society. So it was the ambition that got chosen, generally speaking, by the weaker kids on the playground, who lived more in their fantasies than in reality. They wanted to rebuild society according to their fantasies. They wanted to rebuild reality closer to the American soul's desire. They wanted to write in the light of a final faith that would transform their portraits of frustration into the opposite. They wanted to believe in the promise of America. They wanted to believe in a fantasy of human potential. They were tied up emotionally, psychologically, every way with the American dream, as if it were a person, as if their own fulfillment as human beings depended upon the fulfillment of the American dream at the poetic height at which they conceived it, which is absolutely impossible, right? No nation is going to live up to poetry. And because they had this dream of an impossible ideal, they felt they could therefore let go in their work to the full extent possible of their negative imagination. Everything bad, stinky, awful, unjust, painful, stupid, outrageous in their own lives and the lives they saw could now be discharged at full intensity in their fiction. The underlying implication is just and right to give such a ferocious bite to negative expression, because it was all just an attempt to redeem an invisible psychic Bill of Rights. So you can see the left-wing mindset here that so typical of writers and novelists. So you have this towering idealism of a fantasied ideal that then allows one to focus on the dark reality. The more the novelist envisions the way things should be, the more he felt he had a duty to show the ugly side. So what was it that was said about Robert Kennedy? Other men see the world as it is. Robert Kennedy looked at the world and said, why not achieve these fantasies? So to be on the left is very much to live in a kind of a fantasy world about the innate goodness of human nature. So the novel, for many people who are frustrated in real life, caught in the emotional hell of a frustrated real life, the novel became a wish fulfillment device for would-be lovers banished from the central playground that taunted us via radio, billboards, movies, and our own famished unconscious. So in other words, guys who are not getting laid in real life, who are not making it in real life, who aren't able to navigate reality, they get lost in the novel. So we kids who wanted to write the American novel knew without analysis. We responded totally with sharpened feelers to the unspoken values that lay behind any particular book. We knew by feel that even if a specific book baffled our haughty teenage heads, it contained a purposeful thrust about a part of the country's experience. It was criticizing America under the table to purge and to uplift it. Well, just try doing that in your own life. Try constantly criticizing your spouse or your friends and see how that works out. The great American novel was forever encroaching on the most taboo, subtle, and previously undefined aspects of our mutual life to show a truer picture of the way we lived. Is this true of Hemingway? No, I don't think this is so true of Hemingway. So these are gross generalizations. I don't think this is true of Hemingway. So those of us, sensitive types, under-earners, people failing, I think this is generally true of writers in general. It's not true of all, and I don't think it's true of Hemingway. But us sensitive types who treasure each hurt, each slight, who are too afraid, too short, too tall, too poor, too afraid of girls, too afraid of boys, too crippled, too neurotic, too psychotic, too vulnerable. Okay? It's we who think that being a novelist will heroically reclaim ourselves, that we can recreate the bitter truth about our own personal lives, So it takes sensitivity of the most piercing kind to provide the openings in the personality where painful experience can lodge and stick. So one day it can all be poured forth in answer against frustration, both personal and social. We who wanted to be novelists not only thought it was the most free and ultimately ethical means of American expression. We needed fiction to confess, absolve, and justify our own lives. But now we've got live streams where I can confess, absolve, and justify my own life. So I don't have to write fiction anymore. So people who want to write novels, generally speaking, middle-class losers who can't make it inside the accepted framework. We are the thin-skinned minority, set apart in our own psyches, right? Not in the more prestigious rungs of society or in the upper rungs of the school pecking order, right? We're the thin-skinned minority, set apart in our own psyches to observing when we want to act. We're looking on at life when we want to participate. We think we want to participate. We are the kids who are constitutionally unable to live the American way in teens. And now we're going to pour it all out in our words. So writing the novel or writing in general, or this kind of first person orating on a live stream, is basically a pimply revenge on life. This is the outcast tribe of failures getting their own back. This is all the shrimpy, titless, thick-lensed, crazy-head dropouts and sore losers resolving in the utter misery of the dateless Saturday night. That's what we are, right? Okay? You're listening to a live stream from the shrimpy, titless, thick-lensed, crazy-headed dropouts, sore losers resolving in the utter misery of the dateless Saturday night to shoot down their better favored peers in the pages of a novel or a live stream. That's what's happening here. So this gift to recreate lifelike scenes and dialogue, to be good at description, to have moral perceptions, it's all spiced and rehearsed by unhappiness. It's all fueled by frustration and failure. So the novel or stand-up comedy or the live stream is, for those of us caught in emotional hell, it's a wish fulfillment device for would-be lovers banished from the central playland that taunts us via radio, billboards, the internet, movie marquees, and our own famished unconscious. There are all these big, smooth, beautiful people, a world of blue eyes and blonde hair and supple tennis racket bodies that you feel like you can never belong to. And now you want to be on top of them. So the American novel, for those of us who feel like precocious outsiders, those who feel like they fail to measure up to the gleaming movie stars and TV stars and live stream stars, it's a magic, lifelike double in which we can just work off our private griefs and we can transform them into messages of hope and light. We make our lives by the act of live streaming or writing a novel. That's what we're doing here. This is the art. It's the freest, the most total kind of expression for reality-loving idealists. Here's the place where truth can be told, as it cannot be in real life, nor in any place but one's mind. And we can form so close to reality, to living itself. So art, writing, live streaming is redemption of the frustrated self. It's a glorification of the losing self. It's a yielding female art that is responsive to our most private subjective needs. This provides the only complete outlet for a being that was choked and distorted in our waking relationship to society. It's the golden cup of a modern fable, one that we want to fill to overflowing with all the repressed hunger in ourselves, one that we can announce our fame. I've got 11 live viewers, guys. We can toast us to the sky because of our verbal triumph over the weights that nearly crushed us. We can make true in imagination what could not be realized in the bruising action of daily life. So good. So it's action on a literary level. It's action with words. It's dream action. But it has the wrinkles and the facade of photographic realism. So our prose is going to be streamlined like our country itself. It's going to be stripped down, whipped down. We're just going to bullet across the internet or the page. Behind our lean, aware, dirty knowingness, we are tuned in to the impossible freedom of the novelist or the live streamer, working out his total hidden life before our eyes. That's what I'm doing here. I'm working out my total hidden life before your eyes. That's what makes live streaming and writing novels the tremendous adventure. No matter how embarrassing and shameful and awkward and subjective and personal the original motives that might drive us to do this. So can you imagine a human being being molded by something as abstract as a literary art form? But it's real. Many of us, our values, our colors, our slant on life is people dominated by reality. But we are sustained by a beautiful obsession with fiction. It keeps us secretly, spiritually high like early Christians. It puffs us up with humility. It humbles us with pride. It makes us into every character we ever imagined. Puts us in every story we could cook up. Not as an actor might express it. There are correspondences, but we novelists, we think of actors as childish narcissists. We love ourselves for the infinite range of life that writing the novel gives itself to us. Seymour Krim, awesome here. 40 needs to write the great American Jewish novel. Hey, Affirmative Right is in the house. Blessings to Affirmative Right. So I'm just doing this show on my phone, so I can't bring anyone onto the show right now. Luke, what are you reading from? I think it's quite bad, God forbid. I think it's quite awesome. The American novel made us. Seymour Krim. Seymour Krim is great. Luke, you seem to be high and in a good mood tonight. It's because I had that diatomaceous earth with essential water earlier today and had a wonderful time at synagogue and saw all my friends. Mate, what wacky tobacco are you smoking? Could I have some? Not smoking any wacky tobacco, but I've discovered Seymour Krim, and he's the best. Really enjoying this guy. So he knows that when he flunked out of college in 1940, a year after finishing high school, he did not see this as a failure. He saw this as a new and soon-to-be significant phenomenon that I would be able to write about from first-hand experience. Yeah, that was how I've understood most of my failures. This is just more material that I'm going to be able to turn into a novel. So Norvin is live streaming. Shawls have kiddish. What a wonderful kiddish. Like, not just a kiddish, just a full lunch, my friends. Full lunch with my friends, people getting rather happy with lots of alcohol. A beautiful sunny day, 70 degrees outside. Just like I was embraced by the warm bosom of my adopted Jewish family. Had a lovely time. So the first time I got laid, drunk, smoked tea, shipped out, jumped ship, saw death, spent the night in a hospital, spent the night in jail. The first time I masturbated over the fantasy of going to bed with my sister, put on women's panties and silk stockings for kicks, got into my first adult street fight. All these firsts and 100 others were special, fated, grand experiences for me and for those like me, because I was a novelist to be and I was on a special trip. And I identify with Seymour Krim here in many of those things, not all. What a dream it was. What a marvelous hurt-proof vest. Yes, that's when you have the fantasy about yourself as becoming a great novelist one day, like I've had much of my life. It's a marvelous hurt-proof vest. Nothing can hurt you. Yes. Marvelous hurt-proof vest we all wove in the name of the novel, which is just another name for religion or faith. Now, Seymour Krim notes here in this 1969 Playboy magazine essay, I did not finally write novels. He never did, committed suicide in 1989. Did not write any novels, but I was made as a person and as a mind, as a writer in their image, just as a newer generation is being created by the movies. I may not have had the talent to write novels, or the needs of the post-World War II period shifted in my eyes and in those of my friends. We put much more importance on trying to understand a new world zooming up around us rather than on expressing what we already knew. So he was trying to come to terms where he never wrote the novel. We became intellectual instead of open. Much of that same apocalyptic sense of possibility we once felt for the great American novel now went into examination, literary criticism. So the works of fiction became a means for us to examine life. Wasn't that what it was all about anyway? Ren our sincere and troubled rationalizations. So the form of the writing changed in the 40s and 50s, changed from fiction to nonfiction. The goal remained the same, to articulate, reflect American reality by individuals who were suffering, who were unstable, who were constantly self-analyzing and self-doubting. So Seymour Krim says, I sweated the national anxiety out in myself. What direction was I going to go in? The idea of the novel still hangs over me as a kind of a star, but getting farther and farther distant as my ignorance in other areas, politics, poetry, sociology, history, painting, was steadily exposed. And I tried powerfully to educate myself. Now that, as a non-novelist, I was being challenged socially and in print. That's so powerful. So the idea of the novel still hung over him like a star, but it was getting farther and farther distant. So his dream of being a novelist, it kept him warm for 20 years. He'd put all his golden hope eggs in this mighty basket. But now he was torn from this sustaining fantasy by his own failure to act. He was forced to fend for his self-esteem in a hard-boiled New York Jewish intellectual community with the literary political magazines where he published. They had no sympathy for his inspirational couplets of what the American novel means to me. They thought it was a put-on because I had written none, or a sentimental indulgence. So whether it was because he allied himself with the new criticism in his more cerebral search for reality, or because he was simply incapable of thinking novelistically, or because the truth no longer seemed to reside in the great American novel. So by the mid-1950s, Seymour Krim began to regard the novel as a used-up medium. So he'd been given great hope and direction by this medium. He justified all his pain by his very existence. He thought one day he would redeem his life and redeem the country through writing the great American novel. The beauty of knowing the novel was there was like a loving woman for me to go to when beaten down to my knees. It was not easy for him to accept that this doesn't sing from my time the way it once did. So was there a fundamental change of perception about where the significant writing action lay? Fictional realism, on which we'd been shaped and reared, seemed to lead to further realism that existed in the world of nonfiction, in the world of fact. We'd been so close to the real thing with the style of superrealism, it's now impossible to restrain ourselves from wanting to go over the edge into autobiography, to the confessional essay, to reportage, because in these forms we could escape from the growing feeling that fiction was artificial compared with using novelistic sweep on the actual experience we lived through each day. He didn't want to write a novelist, he wanted to be seen as a novelist. A Fan's Notes by Frederick Exley is a great American novel. He wrote 2 more before dying of alcoholism. A Fan's Notes is about his preoccupation with New York Giants running back Frank Gifford. Yeah, I've heard excellent things about that work. So the realistic 30s novel made us want to take that giant step further into the smellable, libelous, unfaked dimension of sheer torn pocket reality. My actual goodbye world flip out in 1955. So James Agee was pounding on his small car in Santa Monica a year before he died, and he told a friend of mine who had casually quoted a line from Agee's first and only book of poems, "I wasted it. I should have only written poetry," sobbing while he banged on the hoods with his fists. And there was Elia Kazan, the movie director, looming over Paddy Chayefsky and me at the Russian tea room, saying he'd come to see the isolated Clifford Odets, the golden boy with cancer, who'd crept back to New York to sniff the ozone of dead triumphs before perishing on the coast. And Elia Kazan spoke how he'd met Odets at 17 at the University of North Carolina, how he'd taken me for a ride in his fast Cadillac, switched me on so that I rapped pre on the road about speed. All these once repertorial facts now became the truest story for those of us whose appetite for what is had been built up to a point no longer satisfied by fiction. Seymour Krim here in Playboy 1969. Am I planning to come to Sydney, Australia soon? I'm planning to come back to Australia as soon as these restrictions end. So I'm just waiting for an end to restrictions, and I would very much like to come back to Australia. So during the 1950s and 60s, Seymour Krim found the novel increasingly irrelevant. The audience for it in America was no longer loyal and as excited as it had been, because we were mentally and emotionally bowled over now by TV, movies, electronic communications of every sort. So if you had a story that you wanted to tell, you could write it for the Saturday Evening Post, you could tell it on TV or movies. There's only a small number of people who seem to hold out strenuously for the novel. So these electronic whisperers of tomorrow could in a momentary flash do what Flaubert and Conrad spent their lifetimes trying to achieve with words, above all to make you see. But there are things that the novel does better than any other medium, and that's to allow you to get into the heads of multiple characters, the subjective perspective. So there are things that the novel does better than movies, TV. Okay, let me get to the very heart of this essay before I wind up.
Exactly 1 second. But one of the men carrying the door trades places with the seamy people of our own social world. We momentarily pay more attention to them than when we meet people who are different than us. Now, would this shift of attention extend to whether or not we actually see others who are not like us? They ran the experiment again. Except this time, the stranger was dressed as a construction worker. Hard hat, boots, and...
Okay, so in the 50s and 60s, Seymour Krim noticed there's a deluge of new novel, but he experienced reading new novels as a frantic duty rather than a great thrill. And it became impossible to keep up with all the diversity of new novels. So the impact of the novel on his life became less important, less crucial. So he felt the entire role of the American novel had been transformed into something entirely different in the 1960s to what it had been to him in the 1930s. So he looked at writing novels as a way to lift the national life into the realm of justice, to use the total freedom of imagination to rearrange the shit-specked facts of our American experience into their ultimate spiritual payoff. We wanted to build Jerusalem out of America's fresh green breast. The novel was our transcendent, our more than could ever be vehicle for this rocketing need toward fulfillment of both ourselves and the nation. So the novel was imaginative action. So if you couldn't make it in real life because of one handicap or another, then you could do it through your books. That was even better. Your goal was the same as the man of action. Your books were deeds that came out of your mixture of vision and moral commitment. They stood as the seal of where you were humanly. There could be no faking about taking a stand. You were measured every step of the way by readers who took your fiction as acts that influenced the world, till they are outdistanced by new and more penetrating fictions. It was a sole contest of the keenest kind, with America as the beneficiary. But now, by the 1960s, the effectiveness of this imaginative action seems to have been reduced to mere toenail picking by the tornado voices of the mass media. Novelists have become pawns in the newscast of each day's events. Our novel can no longer affect these events in even an indirect sense. Almost every ounce of my energy is used in coping with my own life. Things happen too fast for me to be affected by the stance of some protagonist in fiction. I'm spun around by each latest threat to my survival. So what was the charismatic lure of the American novel now becomes an extravagance rather than a necessity. So now he's trying to find in nonfiction and in literary criticism the crucial excitement that the novel used to hold for him. So what happens to that awesome authority of the imagination that novelists once exhibited, that seemed to dictate our lives? What happened to that great ton of submerged American experience? What happens to that special mission, to that holy mission of making an imaginary American world that would be more real than the real world? Where does the legendary US novelist go when he is no longer a cultural hero in a radically new environment, when his medium is passing into the void of time, when he is stuck with a roaring inner need to speak, to confess, to design, to shape, and to record? Well, maybe he goes to live streams. So maybe the great wannabe American novelist abandons his imitation or caricature of reality and steps away from the desk of fiction. Maybe we only now have literary individuals themselves, and struggling with their own destinies, struggling with emotional, sexual, political, racial, artistic, philosophical, and financial problems. Maybe we should just state these to the reader or to the viewer or the listener as candidly as possible, brought into the new, mutual, non-novel of American life, and make possible a truly democratic prose of total communication that can lead to new action in society itself. So maybe we're living in the age of the ex-novelist turned live streamer. So we can see this new communicator with Norman Mailer, with his nonfiction work like The Armies of the Night, Siege of Chicago, Tom Wolfe, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, Norman Podhoritz's book Making It, Dan Wayfield's Between the Lines, Frederick Exley's A Fan's Notes. Maybe these works of nonfiction speak intimately to the reader about these fantastic days we are living through. And if we reveal the concrete details and the particular sweat of our own inner life, maybe then we earn the right to speak openly about everything or to be trusted. If we tell the blunt truth about our own life, our own feelings, our own subjective experiences, if we clean house, lay the entire business of being an American right now on the table without shame, maybe this is our new approach. Maybe just put it all directly before the viewer, as if YouTube were a telephone. How can we suffer from too much truth? Who isn't glad when someone confesses what's really going on with himself? Like when you hear the truth, it feels like the very molecules of the air changes. You had a nice thing going with KMG. What happened? Yeah, we did a show for a year and a half, and it stopped working for me. And I thought it'd be better for KMG and better for me for us to go our separate ways. So it's very intense to collaborate. And if you're watching the show if you couldn't see that the show wasn't working, then you are emotionally blind. You are an emotional imbecile, and that's not to criticize you. That's just pointing out that you have an enormous blindness in your life if you can't see that that show was not working. That you are just emotionally blocked, blind, deaf, dumb, and blind. So that's not to put anyone down for having those disabilities. That's just to let you know that there's a whole range of the human experience that is open to you if you want to explore it. But anyone who couldn't see that that show was not working, then you were just emotionally cut off. You have no idea what's going on if you couldn't see that that show was not working anymore. And that's not to condemn, that's to invite someone to get more clued into their own emotional life, which will then enable them to better understand what's going on with other people. So who is not heartened when somebody respects us enough to tell us who he really is and then asks us to reciprocate? Who isn't heartened by total leveling? Someone who's totally straightforward. So if I talk about my being candidly to you, or write about my being candidly to you, it's inevitable that you too will be pulled into communication. You're interacting with me, I'm interacting with you and others. As long as we have the stomach for the truth, then I become part of your experience, you become part of my experience. And what we've all seen and heard and identified with will not be put aside like a piece of fiction. It's just an extension of the same reality that unites us. We have established a sense of community. The destiny of our lives is somewhat intertwined. In this uncertain time, our destiny has become intertwined in a real way, if we are honest with each other. So this is not just something that's happening in literature. But if I'm honest, you're honest, we're connecting and forming a community. Our lives are touching. For the live streamer, the blogger, the reader, the viewer, we are no longer isolated. We are no longer indifferent. The alienation of our mutual situation has been broken through by my need to make you experience what I have and to share my consciousness. So Seymour Crim says, I want American prose to become a potent force in the life of the individual. So it doesn't have to be prose, it can be live streams. So maybe it's no longer the novelist who shapes our soul. Maybe it can be the live streamer, in addition to the preacher and the rabbi. So the imagination that once led the novelist to build a stairway to the stars, well, he's now forced into coping with his own imperiled life on the same quaking ground that holds us all. We're all being pushed toward a new art of personal survival. We must move into the centers of action to fight for our own fate. We're not leaving the crucial decisions of our time to others while we concentrate on our work, as in the old days. We're now too personally a part of each day's events to pretend that they don't shake us and dominate our existence. Seymour Crim writes, his only choice is to insert himself into these events through his writing or through his live streaming, to become an actor upon them instead of a helpless observer, to try to influence the making of history itself with his art, so that he can save himself as a man. His driving need for direct participation in our national life now makes the new communicator want to change America in a pact with his readers or his viewers, and to begin by changing his own life in the commitment of laying it on the line. So here's the final paragraph in this long 1969 essay for Playboy magazine by Seymour Crim. Time has shown that the vision I saw in the American novel that made me a character in it, the hero who wants to be a novelist, could be fulfilled only if the novel was real and was acted out. Perhaps in the light of this late recognition of my own need to personify what to many others existed solely in the imagination, I was scheduled all along not to write novels, as I always thought, but to try to put their essence into action. So just as I once believed that art was the highest condition to which a person could attain, I now believe that if this is true, it is the duty of those who conceive such an ideal to use it on society and take their literary lives in their hands in the dangerous gamble to make the word deed. That's where the new prose action is 30 years after I got hooked. For real, chums, for deadly real. That's Seymour Krim there in Playboy magazine,
The
1969.
only approach to PT differences in national background, dress, many other noticeable differences that we use every day. We use them to manage all the incoming information by taking little thin slices of it so we can make our perceptual decisions with speed and certainty. By the way, when the two professors explained the door experiment to a class of 50 students and asked them,
So I was reading Tom Wolfe on the New Journalism. It was a piece he published in New York Magazine in 1972. And he talks about this Seymour Krim essay in this piece. He says, in 1969, Seymour Krim wrote a strange confession for Playboy that I just read you, that began, I was literally made, shaped, wetted, and given a world with a purpose by the American realistic novel of the mid to late 1930s. From the age of 14 to 17, I gorged myself with the works of Thomas Wolfe, Ernest Hemingway, William Faulkner, and knew in my pumping heart that I wanted to be such a novelist. The piece turned into a confession because first Krim admitted that the idea of being a novelist had been the overwhelming passion of his life, his spiritual calling, in fact, the pacemaker that kept his ego ticking through all the miserable humiliations of his young manhood. Then he faced up to the fact that he was now in his 40s and had never written a novel and more than likely never would. I was fascinated by the article, but why Playboy was running it, I didn't know. Unless it was the magazine's monthly injection of literary penicillin. I couldn't imagine anyone other than writers being interested in Krim's complex. That, however, was where I was wrong. So this is Tom Wolfe writing in 1972. After thinking it over, I realized that writers comprise but a fraction of the Americans who have experienced Krim's peculiar obsession. Not so long ago, I'm willing to wager half the people who went to work for publishing houses did so with the belief that their real destiny was to be novelists. So press 1 in the chat if you have thought at times in your life that your real destiny was to be a novelist. I had girlfriends who thought their real destiny was to be a novelist, but they never wrote one. Among people on the creative side of advertising, those who dream up the ads, the percentage must have reached 90%. 1955 in The Exurbanites, late A.C. Spektorsky depicted the well-paid Madison Avenue advertising genius as being a man who wouldn't read a novel without checking out the dust jacket blurb and the picture of the author on the back. And if that ego-flushed little bastard with the unbuttoned shirt and the wind rushing through his locks was younger than he was, then he couldn't bear to open the goddamn book. Such was the grip of the damnable novel. Likewise, among people in television public relations, the movies, are the English faculties of colleges and high schools, among framing shop clerks, convicts, unmarried sons living with mum, a whole swarm of fantasizers out there steaming and proliferating in the ego mulches of America, all dreaming that they'd write the great American novel one day. Writing the great American novel was like finding gold or striking oil, through which an American could overnight, in a flash, utterly transform his destiny. And there are many examples to feed the fantasy. In the 1930s, all the novelists seemed to be people who came blazing up into stardom from total obscurity. That seemed to be the nature of the beast. And the biographical notes on the dust jackets of their novels were terrific. The author, you would be assured, was previously employed as a hod carrier, John Steinbeck, a truck dispatcher, Kane, bellboy, Richard Wright, Western Union boy, William Saroyan, dishwasher, William Faulkner, a truck driver, a logger, a berry picker, a spindle cleaner, a crop duster, a pilot. There was no entrant. Some novelists had a whole string of these credentials. That way, you knew you were getting the real goods. So this is Tom Wolfe in the February 14, 1972 issue of New York Magazine, The Birth of the New Journalism, Eyewitness Report by Tom Wolfe. Subhead: Participant reveals main factors leading to demise of the novel and the rise of the new journalism. So Tom Wolfe begins this essay. I doubt if many of the aces, meaning the great writers of new journalism, I will be extolling in this story, went into journalism with the faintest notion of creating a new journalism, a higher journalism, or even a mildly improved variety. I know they never dreamed that anything they were going to write for newspapers or magazines would wreak such evil havoc in the literary world. Have you heard of the new journalism? Kind of exploded in the late 1960s. Causing panic, dethroning the novel as the #1 literary genre, starting the first new direction in American literature in half a century. So if you have a choice, 2 books are equally well written, equally captivating, but one is nonfiction and one is fiction, I think 95% of guys would rather read the nonfiction. And there's a lot of gripping, exciting nonfiction out there. That is what happened. Saul Bellow, John Bart, John Updike, even the best of the lot, Philip Roth. The novelists are all out there ransacking the literary histories and sweating it out, wondering where they now stand. Damn it all, Saul. The Huns have arrived. So Tom Wolfe notes, God knows I didn't have anything new in mind, much less anything literary, when I took my first newspaper job. I had a fierce and unnatural craving for something else entirely. Chicago, 1928, that was the idea. Drunken reporters out on the ledge of the news, peeing into the Chicago River at dawn. Nights down at the saloon, listening to Back of the Stockyards being sung by a baritone who is only a lonely, blind bulldyke with lumps of milk glass for eyes. Nights down at the detective bureau. It was always nighttime in my daydreams of the newspaper life. Reporters didn't work during the day. I wanted the whole movie, nothing left out. And what reduced him to this student Prince Maudlin state of mind? Well, he couldn't help it. He just spent 5 years in graduate school. Statement that may mean nothing to people who've never served such a stretch, because it's hard to convey what graduate school is like. Nobody ever has. Millions of Americans now go to graduate schools, but just say the word graduate school and what picture leaps into the brain. Half the people I knew in graduate school were going to write a novel about it. I thought about it myself. No one ever wrote such a book. Everyone used to sniff the air. How morbid, how poisonous. Nothing else like it in the world, but the subject always defeated them. It defied literary exploitation. Such a novel would be a study of frustration, but a form of frustration so exquisite, so ineffable, nobody could describe it. If you've been to graduate school, how would you describe that experience? This is how Tom Wolfe tries to describe it. Try to imagine the worst part of the worst Antonioni, so Michael Antonioni movie you've ever saw, or try to imagine reading Mr. Semler's Planet by Saul Bellow at one sitting, or just reading it, or being locked inside a Seaboard Railroad roomette 16 miles from Gainesville, Florida, heading north on the Miami to New York run with no water and the radiator turning red in a psychotic overboil, and George McGovern sitting beside you telling you his philosophy of government. That will give you the general atmosphere of graduate school. So Tom Wolfe says by the time he received his doctorate in American Studies in 1957, I was in the grip of a disease of our times, in which the sufferer experiences an overwhelming urge to join the real world. So when I came out of 6 years of bedridden chronic fatigue syndrome, did not want to return to university, which I was doing prior to getting sick. I wanted to strike out something completely new. If going to university got me sick, I needed something completely different. So Tom Wolfe had this overwhelming experience like I did to join the real world. So he started working for newspapers, and in 1962 he arrived at the New York Herald Tribune. This is the real world time, Tom. Wreckage and exhaustion everywhere. To be continued.